Historical events are like drops of water. They form, then join, at first unnoticed, indistinguishable. Then they gather force and meaning. They move at their own pace. At some point, they reach a climax. Such a year was 1776.
I, George III, by the grace of God, King, declared the American colonies in rebellion.
I, John Adams, thought that the time for independence was at hand.
I, Thomas Jefferson, wrote that all men are created equal.
I, George Washington, led a barefoot army through the snow.
Come back with us now, almost 200 years. You will see the very places where these events occurred and the men who made them happen. For out of these events grew others, and we are the product of them all. It is all part of the saga of Western man. It is the year 1776. It was still an age of kings. In 1776, kings ruled over vast and populous kingdoms, surrounded by glittering courts, and to judge from appearances seemed destined ever to increase their prestige, wealth, and power. The Palace of Versailles was the most splendid building of its day. But appearances deceived. The progress of history had changed Western man and his needs, and royal persons had remained much the same. On the throne of France sat Louis XVI, serenely unknowing the tragic fate which waited him and his family. The French Revolution would exact of him and his wife Marie Antoinette and their children the bitter price of repression. In the world of 1776, Britain was the foremost power. She had recently defeated France in a great war and swept the French out of North America. Her fleets ruled the seas, her trade was worldwide. And in England ruled George III, an ambitious and stubborn man, not knowing he would be the last king to rule the 13 American colonies. They had been an irritant to his royal will since his coronation. The American colonies were also a sore subject to British Parliament, which for so long had been listening to American protests and complaints. The Americans had many friends and sympathizers here, but the majority of Parliament agreed with their king that the colonies existed for the benefit and prosperity of the motherland, that Britain, like a mother, must be obeyed. Britain was in debt. It was only fair for the American colonies to pay their share of it. That was the British point of view. In each North American colony flew the British flag. In each colony there was a governor, and most of them were appointees of the king. But in each colony there was also an elected legislature, as this one in Virginia, patterned on the English Parliament, and just as jealous of its powers. They believed each colony should make its own laws, not the king and his parliament in England. They were full-grown men, and that was the American viewpoint. They were different from Englishmen because they lived in a different land, in the immense grandeur of a continent largely virgin, immensely rich and still untamed. Of that great land they were the children. Not far from any of them was life on the frontier and the hardships and the simplicity which forged their character. The need to struggle to stay alive. The need to overcome whatever difficulty by oneself. A deep sense of individualism. The need constantly to grow, to the nearest hill, then the farthest ridge, and to push beyond, beyond. How could a government upon an island 3,000 miles away make laws for a continent still untamed? The colonies might condemn the acts of king and parliament, but the social ties were still strong. It seemed like a family argument. A ball at the governor's palace, as this one in Virginia, was the peak of every social season. It was attended by all the most prominent men, regardless their political opinions. It was a graceful and civilized world in which men and nations seemed to behave according to a code as stately and measured as the minuet. At the governor's dinners, arguments about the colonists' rights and the king's demands became ever more heated. Yet at the end of every dinner, there was always the same toast.
Gentlemen, the king, the queen, and the royal family.
The king.
The king.
The king.
And then one day, the toasting ended. The crisis came in Boston and over a shipment of tea. For more than 10 years, Boston had led the colonies in protest. They attacked the governor's house to protest the Stamp Act, and Parliament repealed the Stamp Act. They rioted to protest the duties on trade, and Parliament withdrew the duties on trade. But one duty Britain would not withdraw, the tax on tea. And tea became the symbol of the royal will. A former tax collector, Samuel Adams, was a leader.
Today, we may only drink British tea and then pay a tax on it. What will they say tomorrow? Will they forbid us to eat our bread? Will they arbitrarily inform us that we must pay tax for the privilege of working at our trades? This is tyranny. The extent of the deed is not as deadly as the deed itself.
In countless town meetings over a number of years, Bostonians voiced their protests. This night, they demanded that the governor return the tea to Britain. The governor refused.
Parliament has no right to tax us.
We will not pay the cost of empire. Down with tyranny.
Let them pay their own bills. We will pay ours. Don't let them land the tea. We are free men. Free!
On the night of December 16, 1773, 342 tea chests were thrown into Boston Bay.
Let the brew spread to England.
Let the king drink it. Damn the king.
It was a deliberate act of defiance against king and parliament. It brought a quick response.
The die is now cast. Boston must pay for the tea and repent its evil ways. Close the port of Boston to all trade. Send an army to isolate the city by land. Bring Boston to its knees. Be firm. Be firm.
Boston port was closed. The town was full of soldiers, but the waterfront, the city's heart, was still.
Boston now suffers in the common cause. Will you, sister colonies, help her?
We are left just so much as to keep us from perishing of cold and hunger.
Don't pay for 1 ounce of the damn tea.
Rally to the support of Boston.
There are no distinctions between colonies today. We are no longer Virginians, Pennsylvanians, or New Yorkers. We are Americans.
The King in Parliament had achieved what the colonies had never done for themselves, united them in a common cause. In every colony, there were days of fasting and prayer for the deliverance of Boston.
Lord of our fathers, give us the strength to bear this evil oppression which so weighs upon us. Give us humility, give us the understanding of your great design, and give us the will and the courage to withstand tyranny.
The colonies prayed together and then met together. In September 1774, the First Continental Congress gathered in Philadelphia. It decided that no American colony would have any more trade with Britain so long as Boston port was closed. It was hoped that this act would bring the King in Parliament to their senses. But the most prophetic voice came out of Virginia. It belonged to Patrick Henry.
Gentlemen may cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The next gale from the north will bring to our ears the clash of resounding arms. Our brethren are already in the field. Why stand we here idle? What is it that gentlemen wish? What would they have? Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death.
It is Boston, the night of April 18, 1775. The British have learned that the militia are gathering arms and ammunition in nearby Concord and Lexington. General Gage orders a force to capture them. Robert Newman, the sexton of North Church, climbs the stairs. There are 2 lanterns stored in the steeple. Nearby wait Paul Revere and William Dawes. 2 horses are ready for them across the Charles River. One lantern if the British go by land. 2 if by water.
The British are coming! The British are coming!
The British are coming!
The British are coming!
The British are coming! The British are coming!
To arms!
To arms!
To arms!
To arms!
lightning dawn marched the British troops, 800 of them, a sizable military group in that day. They were British regulars, part of the best disciplined army of that time. They did not expect to fight. After all, their mission was to confiscate stores of arms and powder. The colonists would not object. The colonists had no stomach to fight. It took soldiers to wage battles. No mob would stand to the king's army. But they were tired of being hated and ridiculed in Boston. Let these Americans take heed and be prudent. These were the soldiers of His Majesty, the King. On Lexington Green, 60 Minutemen waited. The powder and arms were their property. They had paid for them, not the king.
Stand your ground. Don't fire unless fired upon. But if they mean to have a war, let it begin here. Lay down your arms, you damned rebels! Lay down your arms!
Eight American dead lay upon the green. No Englishman had been hurt. That spring of 1775, not all trees would bloom. Not all boys would grow up to be men. It was barely day of April 19. At the Concord Bridge, one could hear the British coming closer. Everyone had heard of Lexington. Now it was their turn. The clash lasted only 3 minutes. 3 British soldiers died at the bridge. On the way back to Boston, 300 Englishmen were either killed or wounded. But at the bridge, it had also quickly ended. For the first time, an American had killed a British soldier in battle. That deep tie which linked the two nations, which had stood so many tests, now was all but slashed through. It is May 1775. The news of Lexington and Concord had spread throughout the colonies, to the Jerseys, to Pennsylvania, to Delaware, the Carolinas. It had reached the great plantation on the banks of the Potomac, the home of a Virginia planter and a colonel of militia. He had already fought his wars against the Indians and the French. He had responsibilities at home. It might be presumed he could think himself too old for further service. Instead, he packed his saddlebags.
I, George Washington, was a planter, a former soldier, not a politician. But matters now were beyond politics, and I felt it was my duty to play a part. I shrank from the thought of independence, I had fought with the British against the French, but the rights of Americans must be upheld. I had been nominated to the Second Continental Congress. I rode from Mount Vernon with a heavy heart. I did not know then that it would not be my home again for 8 years. The Continental Congress met in the State House in Philadelphia. It was a brilliant body, numbering the great men of each colony. There were many thoughts on what should be done. There was some talk of separation from Britain, but most of all, there were plans to prepare a petition to the king beseeching him, assuring him of our tender regard and fidelity to him, begging him for reconciliation. I found these ideas too whimpering for my taste. To my mind, the first goal was to free Boston. Then we would see. The colony's best minds were here. John Hancock of Massachusetts was the chairman, a very determined young man. His business success spoke well for his judgment. Benjamin Franklin, our most famous man, the only one of the Congress with experience abroad. Samuel Adams, some said he would settle for nothing short of independence. His cousin, John Adams, equally firm for our rights, the leader in this assembly. John Dickinson, a Quaker and a distinguished Pennsylvanian. He was opposed to any talk of independence. So were most of the delegates from New York, New Jersey, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, including Robert Morris, also a Pennsylvanian. They were worried by the New England radicals. From the South, there was young Thomas Jefferson, a fellow Virginian, and also men from all the southern colonies. Mostly they kept their own counsel. Yes, there were many points of view, but only one determination: liberty. It appeared to me we would have to fight for it. One day,
Mr. Chairman, I, John Adams, propose a grand American army, and as its commander-in-chief, a gentleman who will command the respect of all America, Colonel Washington.
it was unexpected. I left the hall to wait. They did me honor. But did I have the skill, the experience for this great task? I was a Virginian. The conflict was in New England. Wouldn't I be resented?
General Washington, do you accept?
I will exert every power I possess in the service of this glorious cause. It was done. No longer would I be my own man. I traveled to Cambridge in Massachusetts and set up headquarters in this house. There was a command, but there was no army. It was hardly more than a straggling mob. The militia were not trained for war. Their terms of enlistment were brief, and when ended, the men went home. My time was spent in correspondence with Congress and the colonies. By January 1776, all the news was bad. General Benedict Arnold and General Montgomery had been defeated in Canada. The king had refused our most abject petition and declared us rebels. I had read Thomas Paine's pamphlet called Common Sense, which damned all monarchies. I agree, they are absurd. A republic is the only government for free man. I ordered all toast to the king stopped. I took down the Union Jack for the last time and raised a new flag of the United Colonies. God help us to be truly united. But Boston was still beleaguered. and occupied by the British. As yet, we had accomplished nothing there. How to relieve a city almost surrounded by water? There were 7,000 British regulars in Boston. There was the British fleet under Admiral Howe. The city was at the mercy of the British guns. They had to do nothing, just sit there, secure and carefree. How I envied those guns. If I could place cannons on the heights overlooking Boston Harbor, I could checkmate the fleet. If they fired on the city, I would destroy the ships. But our only big guns were those we had captured at Fort Ticonderoga, more than 300 miles away. 57 guns. I told Colonel Knox to bring them to me. I did not tell him how. Brave men, strong men. They came 300 miles across mountains, rivers, lakes, and swamps. Where there were oxen, they used them. Where there were not, they used their own strong backs. I had asked the impossible. They did it. They did not complain. By early March, the guns were close by. I ordered small diversionary actions to attract English attention.
Ready? Fire!
On the night of March 4th, we moved the cannons into place. Now, our guns dominated the British. March 17th, 1776. Soldiers of the Continental Army, I congratulate you on a great victory. You have redeemed Boston and bested the most powerful armed force on earth. Even now, the British are evacuating the city. Even now, they are boarding their ships, raising their flags, and setting sail. We have won a victory, but we have not won the war. Elsewhere must we face the British again and again. The road is long, but at the end stand dignity and freedom.
May 1776, more than a year and several battles after Concord, the British flag still flew in the colonies. The final link with Britain had not been broken. The mood for independence had grown, but there was wanting a lead. The New England colonies were distrusted. The Middle Atlantic areas were undecided. It would have to be Virginia, the oldest, the largest colony, rich and conservative. But even at this juncture, it was a hard decision. On May 15, the delegates filed into Williamsburg's House of Burgesses.
Resolved that the United Colonies are free and independent states and are absolved from all allegiance to or dependence upon the Crown and Parliament of Great Britain, and that they give the assent of this colony to such declarations and to whatever measures may be...
It was simple and clear-cut, and there was only one name for it in the language of England: treason.
Mr. Patrick Henry.
Aye.
Mr. James Madison.
Aye.
Mr. Meriwether Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Martin Pickett.
Aye.
Mr. James Mercer.
Aye.
Mr. Henry King.
Aye.
Mr. Thomas Nelson Jr.
Aye.
The vote was unanimous. Even those who entertained doubts voted for independence. This was no time for division or abstention. The bells pealed. The people of Williamsburg knew that the deed was done. The crowds followed the flag of the United Colonies, called the Grand Union, the first American flag, to the House of Burgesses. Thus did His Majesty George III pass out of Virginia. But the decision for independence was easier in one colony than in the Congress of 13. The delegates were divided. Some were violently for independence, some were opposed, some felt the time was not ripe. Yet over every man hung the fact that decision could be postponed no longer. It was June 7th. The weather was warm and tempers short.
Virginia proposes that the colonies are free and independent states, and that they unite in confederation and form suitable foreign alliances.
Massachusetts second.
Objection! Mr. Chairman, New York objects!
Objection! Mr. Chairman, please.
Deep division. The chairman appointed a committee to draft a declaration should the delegates eventually decide for independence. Included on the committee were Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson.
I was the youngest member of the committee. I'd never even taken part in the debates. John Adams was best suited to prepare the Declaration.
I will not.
What can be your reasons?
You are a Virginian, and a Virginian should be the head of this business. I am unpopular, you are not. And you can write 10 times better than I can.
All right, I will do the best I can. I had taken rooms on the second floor of a house on Market Street, a quiet place convenient to the Congress. This was the object of the Declaration of Independence, not to find out new principles or new arguments, but to place before mankind the common sense of the subject in terms so plain and firm as to command their assent. It was intended to be an expression of the American mind. In that spirit, I proceeded. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just power from the consent of the governed. I paced the floor. I was conscious of a great responsibility. I wrote of matters which I knew would not be popular, but also conscious that never before had it been given to any group of men so openly to declare their devotion to the equality and right to freedom of all mankind. Even if I was a slave owner from the South, I condemned slavery in the strongest words. I called it an execrable commerce, an assemblage of horrors. The words might be deleted. A large section of our states, including mine, was deeply invested in slave labor. Northern merchants profited from slave trade. If they struck the words, the problem would remain for future generations. Would this declaration ever reach a vote? There was still much opposition even to the discussion of independence. Yet was there an alternative? In my soul, I could not find one.
On July the 1st, the forces against independence made their last great stand. Their spokesman was John Dickinson.
Let me be unpopular forever, but I will not vote away the blood of my countrymen. We shall ruin ourselves. To leave the protection of Britain, all unprepared as we are, would be like destroying our home in winter before we have another shelter. Think, gentlemen, think!
The time for mere thinking was over. In New York, General Washington was facing a large British army about to land. A great battle was in the offing. It was not a time for appeals to patience. On July 2nd, the British arrived off Long Island and the colonies voted for independence. Now it is July 4th, the time for formal adoption of the Declaration. As Jefferson had foreseen, the clause damning slavery was deleted. A few word changes here and there, but nothing else of great importance. This document of liberty was substantially as he had written it. Now the former colonies, in the view of Britain, were in treason, and all the delegates were traitors. Perhaps for this reason, the Declaration ended with these words.
And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
It is done. Ring the bells!
All over the new nation, the bells rang to the new freedom. Down came the British flags. It was all over. Bowling Green in New York, they tore down the statue of George III and smashed it to bits. But on that day, many did not remember that declarations and independence are words, that it takes men and blood and sacrifice to make them fact. By December 1776, there was no more jubilation and even little ground for hope. The new United States had been unable to provide their commander with an army. By Christmas, Washington had retreated across the Delaware. His only troops were 3,000 starving men who would be free to go home on December 31st.
This new nation we had declared was hard to bring alive. We were poor not because we lacked the means, but because no one could decide who should give us what and when. Men enlisted, did their duty, and went home, sometimes on the eve of battle. Let the others do their share. Everyone waited for congressional action, for concurrence by the states, for help from the King of France. I could wait no longer. In 10 days, the army would go home. Ever since summer, I had been pushed back. From New York to the Jerseys and back to the Pennsylvania bank of the Delaware. Across the river, the British troops outnumbered me. The Hessians were in Trenton. For now, they could not cross. The Delaware is a great river, but as soon as it froze, who would stop them from crossing? I decided to cross, to attack the British. The United States needed a victory, and if we did not gather one before the end of enlistment, the game was pretty well up. I had been invited into a farmhouse, but my men were huddled on the open ground. It was Christmas, the coldest, the loneliest I have ever seen. I could give them nothing except possibly a word of comfort. I had Thomas Paine's new pamphlet read to them. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he that stands it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have this consolation with us, that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph. Most of the men had no shoes. They bound their feet with rags and did not complain. The rations were meager. There were too few muskets and too little powder. But nations are not created, they are forged. I gave the order to attack, and the password, victory or death. We moved towards the river in small groups so as not to create a spectacle. The British and Hessians would celebrate Christmas that night with much beer and dancing. It would be sleepy on the morrow. We must reach them before day, at all costs, before day. wind arose. It snowed, then rained, and then it sleeted. Through it all, the boats made their way. They fought the wind, they pushed aside the ice. The men froze. But it went slowly, much too slowly. The very elements seemed against us. By dawn, we were across. But my men were almost frozen solid. Those without shoes had bleeding feet. Dared I to move? Could man ask of other men this further effort? Forward. Move forward. But generations after will scarce know the price of what they so easily accept.
Men seldom know the cost of freedom until called upon to pay the price. It is a lesson each generation seems fated to relearn. These bloody feet led to a new nation, towards a new dream. It would be up to those who followed to try to make it real. But these men started us on the way. They were the spirit of 1776.